Hello, fellow YouTubers. Bear Prepper here. So, for today's coffee chat, we're actually going to use the conflicted cards from Survival Logics with an S on the end.com. I think they've got 5 decks now, the conflicted cards, and you know, some of the questions on there, they're not going to be things that might pertain to you, but there are a lot of good scenarios and questions in these cards that really get you thinking. And so today I'd like to go ahead and focus on one of those. And Survival Logics, thank you for making these available to people, because that's one of the reasons why we're having the coffee chat, is because a lot of people don't have somebody that can even think of the questions with, let alone think of how they would respond. So they're really great to have. So today we're going to read one. Your bug out location is far off the beaten path, but you feel you need to put something as a barrier to discourage people from heading down your way. There aren't enough materials to build a physical barrier. It has to be a psychological one that would cause people to turn away just from seeing it. What kind of a psychological barrier would you build, and how would it be effective? You know, that's a really interesting question, and I think it pertains to us a lot because the retreat is off the beaten path.
Yeah.
And, you know, we can do a physical barrier. We've thought about that, but it never even crossed my mind to do a psychological barrier and what that would be.
I didn't either. I think about a physical barrier a lot. You know, being in this part of the country, we have cactus, and it makes a great barrier. You know, you get it thick enough, it's hard to get through, especially the larger, you know, varieties. Rocks, we have a multitude of rocks. So we do that, but to have a barrier that's not physical, you know, in a sense, the way I interpret it is just something that people don't want to, well, it either scares them or it's not worth the trouble, you know, to venture forth. One thing I thought of was a sign. You know, it just said bad water, you know, and maybe scatter around a few dead animals, dead bodies if you got them, you know. It depends on how far along we are in a crisis to, you know, what kind of barrier that you can put up and what the crisis is. You know, if it happened to be nuclear, you know, or a radiation, you know, barrier or sign, you know, or something like that, there's a lot of diseases, you know, depending on what part of the world you're in at the moment. You know, here we don't have, living in the States, we don't have as many horrible diseases as other places do that kill quickly. You know, there is rabies and, you know, those kind of things. But initially, it's going to be hard to scare people away, I think, unless you have, like I said, you know, they're going to need water and food. You know, that's most what people are going to be scrounging around for, and shelter.
Yeah, that's a really good one. I never even thought about putting up a sign as a deterrent. My thoughts go more to maybe taking the house closest to the street, the first one they would see, and burning it down. And then throwing clothes and half-open doorways, maybe building, you know, like a fake hallway with a door at the end or something. So, and leaving the door cracked open with stuff just kind of dragged out, you know, like they were going through stuff. and dropping or throwing TVs and things like that, so that they would think, maybe they would think, that the area had already been ransacked and that there would be nothing to find there. We're far enough, I think, from the initial entry for our situation that might work and it might not, because we're kind of close, but close enough to see if somebody comes, but far enough away that as long as we are quiet, and that becomes the problem. With your psychological barrier, you've got to be very careful about noise. And, with 20 people and the way sound travels out in the country, that is going to be the most difficult aspect with the psychological barrier.
That's a good point about noise, especially since, depending on the crisis, of course, it's going to be awful quiet. Where we are especially. There's not going to be any ambient noises, airplanes and cars and other things to mask, what's going on. Plus you're going to have to be cooking, and there's always, and depending on the time of year, you may be having a fire, so you're going to attract, people from afar because they can see smoke and smell too.
I think that's going to be the difficult part for a lot of people if it happens in the wintertime, because how do you remain unseen in the winter? In the summertime, it's so much easier because you can use, at least here in Texas, we can use solar ovens. We can use those insulated bags to cook our meals so that we're not making the smell go everywhere. And so that, in the beginning, that's pretty much our plan. Not using fire if at all possible, finding other ways to get the food heated or whatever. So, but, psychological barriers, that's, I guess you could put human heads on a stick. I mean, if you want to be that gruesome, and it might make people think twice about even coming close, but I don't know if I could do that.
It'd be a difficult thing to do, but if you come, like I said, if it's into a crisis where there's, after a couple of weeks, there's going to be people dying off because people that don't have,
diabetics,
medicine, diabetics, all kinds of circumstances where you're going to have a pretty good die-off of people, pretty quickly. The very old and aged that can't, fend for themselves to start with. And those people that haven't prepared, at all. Not to mention the bad guys that are out there that are going to be roaming the countryside taking advantage of, the situation. Because there's not going to be any, there won't be any police, there won't be any, probably won't be any government to speak of. So, it's an every man for himself kind of deal. So, you may have access to some bodies, and I think that would be a good psychological deterrent. If there's enough, you could always put them out far enough where, it's not a hindrance to you, because you're going to have to worry about disease and keeping your family healthy and things like that.
Well, I think the best part of this question to consider would be to consider the last part first. If you can think of how something would be effective, so if you can think of how a person's mind in a bad situation would react, then you can easily come up with measures to make that state of mind happen. Another way would be to make it seem like there were much more of you than there was. Yeah. That would be a deterrent, because if you've got a lone group of 4 or 5 people and they hear lots of noise, either they're going to come in as friendlies or they're going to move on and find easier targets.
Right.
Because they aren't big enough to get you. So that would be another way.
Yeah.
You know? I'm hoping our little community right here, which is probably not more than a dozen, you know, in a wide range, you know, a lot of land, that we would all come together in a sense of, you know, watching each side and watching the different areas. And but you got to be careful too. You don't want the same deterrent at all edges, because then they'll know where your boundaries are.
Right.
And so, you know, you have to think of it that way too. So if you've got psychological barriers, you don't want to put heads around the whole thing, because then they know exactly how much space you have and how small or large you are. But I think it all depends on your situation. If you were in the city and you were in an apartment building, you know, how would you, you know, do a psychological barrier? And those are the kind of questions I'd love for you to answer below. You know, I noticed on the last chat, there's a ton of great information that people shared, and it really gets you thinking about your situation. We can only address our situation because that's what we've thought of. But all of you are in different situations.
Right.
And you can add so much value posting below to those that are on their own and may not have considered it. So I really do recommend the conflicted cards. Like I said, not all of them will pertain to you. I mean, we go through these and probably about half of them I just wouldn't even consider even answering.
Right.
Because I know it would never pertain to me. Maybe I'm not half. I take that back. Maybe about an eighth of them. But they're really great to have. And so I'll put the link below for Survival Logic, so that survivallogics.com, so that you can order them. Do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Nothing. They're cool questions. We considered several that would pertain to us. And like she said, everybody has a different situation. You may have a situation where a psychological barrier would be great, and you have come up with a good idea as far as that goes. Other people, it's strictly a physical thing. You got to put up, a physical barrier that people can't get through. Some people will be remote enough that, you're not going to encounter very many, especially in the beginning, because they just can't get to you.
Yeah.
And, but we thought this one was thought-provoking, because it opened up a different question to us at all, because neither one of us had really thought about that.
No.
And
yeah, we always thought of physical barriers.
right.
We have our plan for a physical barrier, and never even once considered a psychological barrier. At least for me, I didn't.
Yeah.
So it really got me thinking. And no, we didn't think about this for a week. We thought about it for about maybe 4 hours? So imagine if you have lots of time to think about it, what could you come up with? So let us know your thoughts below. And if you liked what you saw and heard, please don't forget to rate and comment. And if you're new to my channel, there's a subscribe button right down there. And I thank you for watching. Blessings.